Greetings, one and all. This is Matt Field. I took a small sabbatical. No, I went on vacation for a week with my family, so I didn't get a podcast out to you to kind of review the news that's been happening and other things like that. Again, I am Matt Field, and my objective by doing this entire thing is to get you into the idea of moving from the party voting mentality for governor and other offices to making your decision based upon the facts and what needs to happen. I'm unaffiliated, but I am running as a write-in candidate for governor of the state of Utah. And you can review my proposal /book at govmat.org. Right there on the front page, it's going to have read now on that landing portion of the page. You click on that, it takes you directly to the book. You can download it. You can read it, you can listen to it, there's even a streaming option via Rumble, and I encourage you to do that. Unfortunately, the world we live in right now is convinced that the only way in which we can move forward is if we are being led by a Democrat or a Republican, and occasionally an independent. And this is entirely false, it's wrong, and we have to move from that. We can't just believe that because we are of a certain party that that's how we should vote. And we shouldn't just support candidates that are coming to our inbox and flooding us with emails asking for donations just because they have one particular item that we're interested in. And I'm not saying I'm your guy. I'm saying take the time to review my proposal and make your own decision. But I'm pretty confident that if you do take that time, you will realize that I would be, or at least the policies that I present are the best option for the state moving forward. At least it's a framework to begin with, and we can work from there. So I wanted to start off with this particular clip. It's from Jordan Peterson. You'll instantly understand why I'm using it and why, and to what end I am presenting this to you. So have a listen.
We have Pride Month. Well, what are we celebrating? First of all, how about we don't celebrate pride? Pride's a cardinal sin. And you might say, well, they don't mean pride. They mean it's a group of oppressed people, and now they're just finding their identity and they're getting some security in that identity. And so what they mean by pride is security in that identity. It's like the word's pride. That's the word that was chosen. And it's pride in relationship, as far as I can tell, to nothing but hedonistic self-gratification. It's like your identity is going to be your sexual desire. That's your identity, your sexual desire. So that means you've reduced your identity to the most immature and hedonistic part of you, the part that would exploit someone else for your own gratification, for example, the part that would exploit you for your own gratification. And now that's your identity. And now that's what we celebrate. Yeah, no, that's a very bad idea.
So that is a very good review of what's taking place during this month. They call it Pride Month, and basically everybody's inundated with these pride concepts. And people in Utah, people in the LDS community, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they have accepted it in large part to be something that should be supported, that should be, I guess, celebrated to some degree, which is entirely false. And I agree with Jordan Peterson. I mean, I can't see any other way as to why that's happening, why people are deciding to embrace it, when especially in the LDS culture, when you have someone like President Benson coming out and saying you should remove the word pride from your vocabulary, right? He was in the early 90s, early or late 80s, and he came out and said those different things, but for some reason now we've forgotten those particular teachings, and we think that pride is okay, that it's acceptable, that we can celebrate it. And particularly this hedonistic pride that for some reason has gone totally and completely unabashed in society, and it's been in many ways accepted and celebrated because people feel as though that they are in some way being marginalized. Of course, that marginalization is not true. They are being highlighted as heroes or something in the society, and that, of course, isn't true either. And so if you take the time to review my book / proposal, I review all the ramifications associated with the LGBTQ plus community, and I don't know why it hasn't been more directly addressed in government and in the church setting. But this is something that's entirely wrong. It's entirely inappropriate. And if we continue down this path, we're going to find ourselves in a very, very tough place. In addition to that, if you take the time, and on the same website, govmat.org, you can download for free my other book, which is entitled Living the Fable Tale, The Emperor's New Clothes, where I discuss that we all have predisposition. Everyone's predisposed to act a certain way. And the question lies in, is this particular practice, is this particular habit a good or bad one? I go through alcoholism and how there's genetic markers for that. I go through some other various things that have actual DNA evidence attached to it. But in all reality, we know that alcoholism is not good. And it's the same thing with some of these other things that we are, quote unquote, predisposed. We have to overcome these things, and these obstacles are what are going to make us stronger and make us better. But instead of rejecting these things that are actually bad for us, we have embraced them. And that's why this pride culture is terrible. It's just terrible, terrible, terrible. First of all, pride is bad, but they have taken the rainbow, which was originally a symbol from God to Noah, indicating that he'll never flood the earth again. But the flooding of the earth was the cleansing of the earth, and thus also a representation of Christ's sacrifice for all mankind to save them. And now, terribly, we have taken that symbol and we have deduced it down to something so inappropriate and terrible that it is all based upon the hedonistic desires and immaturity associated with sexuality that we should be bridling throughout our entire lives, but for some reason we have accepted as something that others must have and we must affirm them in. Otherwise, they might find themselves in a tough spot. And again, I review through this in greater detail in my book, the suicide rates, the suicidality, and the quote-unquote gender-affirming care, which is actually just genital mutilation. If you review through all that information, I provide all the receipts, all the references, and these aren't right-wing references. Many of them are associated with the CDC, with the NIH, these national organizations and government entities that have provided multiple studies that attest to what I'm actually talking about. So I encourage you to take that time and to review that, because it isn't what it may seem. So I want to start off on that, but I want to jump into two other topics today. And one is extremely troubling. I'm going to play a clip for you. This is an interview that was recently done. It's a short clip. It's only about a minute. But it has President Donald Trump and Dr. Phil, and they're reviewing over some information regarding China. So take a listen.
Look at this map. I did a show about this. The red is where Chinese government has funded buying major farmland. Yeah. And then superimposed on that are some of our most strategic military bases.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it right there just real quick. And obviously this is just audio, but if you do decide to search this, you can find it fairly easily. The map that's being shown right here, it has the state of Utah, and it has a good chunk, probably from about Tooele area, Salt Lake or so, all the way down through Iron County, basically maybe into Washington County, of land that's been purchased by the Chinese. So it appears as though that, it looks like China owns roughly about a quarter of the state in farmland. Okay, and he's going to go on with that.
And you can see there's Dugway Proving Ground. That's military equipment, biological, chemical weapons. They're surrounding it. Utah Test Training Range, the largest supersonic authorized restricted airspace in the United States. Whiteman Air Force Base.
So those first two that he mentioned, those are both located right next to those pieces of land that the Chinese have acquired, and these are both strategic places. There's also an Air Force base, obviously Hill Air Force Base, and they have essentially engulfed that entire area and have surrounded it with this land that they've purchased. And I don't know why the state has permitted a foreign entity, an entity of which has been, even though has been downplayed in some media outlets, but has actually, many military individuals have come forward and said, hey, there's a big problem with China. There's an issue with China. I encourage you to go check out. There was a recent a discovery via Louder with Crowder. Some of you may not like the guy, but they did do some really good news work there. They uncovered one of the top advisors to one of the generals or admirals in the United States, who basically indicated that our biggest fear is China. And this isn't new. I mean, everybody knows this. The problem is that what is reported is completely opposite. And I think that for the most part, a good chunk of the Utah senators and representatives, and definitely the executive branch, are aware of the possible issues associated with China, and yet they have allowed the purchase of, a huge portion of the state, a massive portion of the state. And you can probably Google that. You can chat GPT it, and you could get a good idea as to how much of those acres that China actually owns in the state of Utah. And it is right next to these strategic places in Utah. This obviously is a huge problem, and it's a terrible thing, but yet there is no action being taken. So if there isn't any doubt, anyone that's familiar with the book The Art of War, which was written by Sun Tzu, I'm not sure if I'm saying that exactly right, but if anyone has ever taken the time to read that, I think you would instantly understand that we are already at war with China. Whether we are acting in the way in which we would if we were in war, that remains to be seen. But China is definitely making moves that would indicate they are at war with the United States. Because the art of war is the idea of allowing your enemy to think opposite of what you are doing. China made the United States think that they were weak, so that they would provide them aid. And they wanted to make sure that they were, quote unquote, investing in certain states, and that they're not trying to attack, they're not trying to take advantage of something, they're just investing. And that kind of leads into another article, this Forbes article, the surprising U.S. state that's prime for Asian investment. China. Notably China, Japan, South Korea, and India. But the majority of that investment, if you go through the article, is leaning toward China. And unfortunately, we continue to look at this as some sort of, as a quote-unquote investment, but in all reality, this is a way in which foreign entities can take control and they can hold us hostage. We have to stop these sorts of things from happening. I'm not someone who is afraid. I love global trade. This is something I've engaged in as a small business. I acquire a good chunk of some of the things that I use via various companies that work overseas. But we can't allow China and other foreign governments to take over the state that is actually supposed to be for the citizens. And I'd love to know, who do you think actually benefited from any of these huge land purchases? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I haven't heard much from the citizens in that regard. We have to make changes there. We have to ensure that the safety is there, because the objective in the end is that China is they're going to, I don't know if anybody knows, I'm not sure people do know this. Those that are actually listening to this podcast, I'm sure you actually are fully aware of this. But the Chinese government has given the sitting prime minister the same power that Mao had. And that hasn't happened in some time. And this is kind of something that this next clip kind of alludes to. It is focused primarily on gun control, but it gives a really, really good example as to the government's handle on the entire concept with China and with the government itself.
This woman ended the gun control debate in just a few seconds.
Actually, I am a Chinese immigrant who survived communism. And under Mao, 40 million people were starving to death after he sold the communism to them. And 20 million people died, murdered during his Cultural Revolution. So my question to you, David, is that can you guarantee me, a gun owner tonight, our government in the U.S., in D.C., will never become a tyrannical government? Can you guarantee that to me?
There's no way I can ever guarantee that any government will not be tyrannical.
Well, then the debate on gun control is over, because I will never give up my guns. Never. And you should go to China to see how gun control works for dictatorship of CCP.
That is such a good example, not just for gun control, but in general. The CCP is going to make it seem as though that what they're doing is good, that it's the right thing to do, but in all reality, it's going to be a Mao-like, as though Mao is presiding over the CCP, and anything else that they have control over, they will wield it the same way that they did, Mao did. And if anyone is hip on the history, I mean, she mentioned it right there, but 40 million people starved to death, right? They literally starved to death because of the way that they decided to pursue these various communistic ideals. And then there was another 20 million that were killed, which, when you listen to some people talk about how they are quoting from Mao, or they're, these different things, it's mind-blowing that they are doing that, because if they were really and completely understood the history of Mao, they certainly wouldn't do that. So this is kind of a roundabout way of saying, if we cannot make the changes that are necessary in the state of Utah, then we're in huge trouble. Not just from the federal government, but from foreign entities. And they're going to use Utah as a way in which they're going to wield power against the rest of the nation. And I think that's obvious. I think it's completely obvious. I think anyone that doesn't view it that way, or at least, look, maybe they don't view it that way, but you prepare for the worst no matter what. Some of you might know this quote: you prepare for the worst, or you assume the worst and hope for the best, right? And that's something that hasn't been happening in the state of Utah. We have blindly kind of moved along and really haven't done what we should be doing to protect our citizens. And this is one of the is a prime example of it. So I did want to go on to one other thing here, which is quite troubling. I've talked about this multiple times. I've talked about it in my book / proposal about what needs to happen, and I'm just going to kind of fly through these different issues or these different clips here real quick, just to kind of give you a taste, and then I'm going to move to one of the current candidates' proposal to fix it, and then I'll give you mine. So this is very interesting. This is a guy that's talking about Wall Street investors that have been purchasing entire blocks of houses. And here, take a listen.
Look at the signs behind me here. For rent, for rent, for rent. These homes are all for rent because they were recently built by a builder called Meritage Homes. And that builder sold these houses to Progress Residential, one of the biggest Wall Street landlords in America. And they bought these houses, which are now sitting vacant on the market for rent for around $2,100 to $2,400 a month. And this is, of course, a concerning trend because these homes could have been purchased by regular home buyers, but instead a Wall Street investor bought them up, and now no one is living in them because the rents are too high. And I personally wonder, what is Progress Residential going to have to cut the rent on these houses in order to rent them? Right now, it looks like there's around 20 available for rent. No one's living in them. Are they going to have to cut the rent down to $1,900, $1,800, $1,700 a month to fill them up? We'll see in future months. And if you're an investor or home buyer who wants to track this type of data on the U.S. housing market, go to www.reventure.app, where you can look at home price and inventory data for every.
So, I mean, that's a good example, and it's a pretty eerie clip because the guy's standing in the middle of this neighborhood, and all you see are a bunch of for rent signs all the way down. And like you said, there's 20 or so homes that are sitting right there. They aren't being rented because there's such a high rent and nobody's picking them up. And this isn't, and you can go to that Reventure Reventure app and check out what is actually happening around the nation and how much has been purchased and where they're sitting. So I'm going to show you one more clip right here talking about various billionaires and their real estate purchases.
3 billionaires destroying the real estate market right now. And number 1, I bet you've never even heard of. Number 3 is Jeff Bezos. He's on here for 2 reasons. He spent millions investing in this company, and you might think it's not a big deal, it's just a real estate company. That real estate company has already bought up 200 single-family homes and taken $100 million of inventory off the market for first-time home buyers. And he's buying up hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland, 420,000 acres, but also way behind Bill Gates. Which is bad, but still not bad enough to be on this list. Number 2 is the CEO and co-founder of BlackRock, Larry Fink. Look at this right here. BlackRock and other corporations are buying up to 30% of available homes in Georgia, 30% in Arizona, and the
So I'm going to stop the clip there real quick. It has in the particular graph right here, this is just for 2021, but they purchased, this is BlackRock, they purchased 27% of the homes in the state of Utah, single homes, okay? Which, do you think that probably contributed to the issues that we have right now? Of course it did. There's also additional data if you go to, I posted it on LinkedIn, I'm trying to remember, but it's upwards of 50 or 60% of all the homes over the last, since the beginning of, since early 2000s, that they have purchased. I should just find, I think it's 40% actually, now I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it's 40% of all homes have been purchased via these private equity firms, rather from individuals. So we'll just continue on with the clip here.
list just goes on and on. 29%, almost 30% in Texas. That's a huge state. They are choking the housing market of much needed supply by buying it all up with cash. Number 1 is businessman John Carl Malone. He's 82, has a net worth of $9.4 billion that he made in telecommunications. He's the largest private owner of farmland across America. And
so you've got all of these people that are, these billionaires that are buying up loads and loads and loads of real estate, driving up the cost, and then it'll just continue to happen. This is artificially happening. Now, who's to say why these particular billionaires are doing what they're doing? You can only speculate until you have actual information. But it's no surprise that places like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, a lot of these big companies, publicly traded companies who have access to trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars to which they can purchase loads and loads and loads of homes. And I've shared in previous podcasts where they have gone in and they've said, hey, we're going to go more aggressive now. We're going to go more aggressive. And so look at the state cost. The median cost has gone from, I think it was $500,000 in Utah. And this was recently reported by KSL. But the cost of homes has gone from approximately, $250 earlier on, $250, $300, all the way up to $500 during the craziness, and now it's all the way up to about $524,000. And there hasn't been as much buying going on lately, okay, because the interest rate has been so high. And yet we continue to see rises in price. And this, again, this is happening artificially. It's happening via private equity firms. It's happening from governments imposing tough regulations on various states and having them move here. That was primarily during COVID. But people are still moving here. There's still lots of out-of-staters coming to the state of Utah. And there's nothing that has been done. The only thing that has been done lately is that there has been an initiative by the Senate and by the legislature in the state to allow first home buyers to get a $20,000 bump for their home. But what does that do? The thing that isn't recognized is the fact that they are essentially placing these poor people into slavery for the next 30 to 40 years, depending on the loan that they decide to take out, but most likely 30 years, at an interest rate that is through the roof, okay, through the roof, and with home prices through the roof. Okay? They are literally selling themselves to work for the bank for the next 30 years so that they can pay for their home. But again, instead of trying to solve the problem that's existing right now, primarily, again, 40% of those homes being purchased are from private equity, and then massive amounts of homes were being purchased by out-of-staters with cash prices, particularly places out of California. Everybody knows that. And you can go look at the data, but it's pretty common knowledge. All this is happening, and what does the state do? They're going to give $20,000 to a native Utahn to jump into a market that is a terrible market and a terrible time to do it. Now think to yourself, does that make any sense? Of course it doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. They have to fix the problem at the root. And this is the problem with so many things, like the homeless crisis. You know the main reason why the people are homeless? Two main reasons. One is drugs. 26% of the people that are homeless are because of hard drugs. The rest of them, almost all of them, alcohol. Those are the two main reasons. Okay? But that's the problem, is we don't actually go to the root. We don't try and address the root of the problem in order to ensure that it doesn't persist. We just allow those things to continue to run rampant. Of course, we have our own southern border, the southern part of the state. We probably have the drugs coming up through that southern border. And again, I propose that we block all the main points of entry in order to prevent those from coming. And this is a way in which that will fix the housing or the homelessness, because they won't be able to get their drugs. Now, there will be still some drugs that are going to get through, but not near as much if you're able to block those locations from where they come. All right, but that was just kind of a side point. So now we're just going to go, I'm going to go over here real quick. I'm not necessarily picking on him, but I'm just trying to indicate how, I'm just trying to show a bit of the lack of innovation that continues to exist, even amongst whom I believe is probably the more popular gubernatorial candidate on the Republican side, which is Phil Lyman. He says that he plans to fix Utah housing affordability crisis. Okay, so his plan. So it goes through this entire portion. Of course, it was paid for by Phil Lyman for governor. Nothing wrong with that. Anyway, he goes through and he talks about how these different things have happened. He says, I don't believe the government can fix our housing market, but we do need to enact some serious reforms to get the government out of the way. Now, I entirely agree with the fact that we need to get the government out of the way. The problem is that the government largely caused it. Okay, the government largely caused it, and primarily governments outside of us, okay, outside the state of Utah. They caused it. The reason people are coming here is because there are fewer, even though there's too many regulations, there are fewer regulations than places like New York, New Jersey, California, and other places like that. Okay, but the problem is that right now we have Lyman kind of opposed the Governor Cox initiative to build 35,000 starter homes, which most likely will just be a bunch of sandwiched together teeny tiny homes in high R3 residential zones, which it's just compacting our state greater and greater and greater, when we should be focusing on utilizing all the land that God has given us to use in this state. But because he's trying to keep up with supply rather than trying to control the demand. So, and again, Lyman doesn't believe, he goes through illegal immigration, he goes through inflation, and many of those things I do agree with him on. And again, I'm not trying to poo-poo him at all, but his proposal, and he makes a really good point here with property taxes, where we should not be paying unrealized gains on our capital, on our homes and stuff like that. That's a really good point. I think we need to eliminate taxes entirely. Again, go to matgov.org, review my proposal. It's very comprehensive. It provides all the information. I had a plan well before I decided to launch into my efforts to run for governor. But again, he doesn't have a plan to address the current situation we're in right now. And the plan that I propose in my book is that we have to highly tax the capital. So as far as taxes go, I think we need to move from a taxation program to an endowment program. And we need to be putting money into an endowment, and we need to learn to live off the endowment interest. Okay, just like a university would. And it's the same process that can happen with the state, but that does mean we have to rein in a lot of spending, and we have to find other ways to fund that particular. We need to fund the endowment fund moving forward, and that's done via two ways. One, at least for now, one is for people coming in from out of state. They need to pay a tax on the acquisition cost of their home. That money would go directly into the endowment fund, and then we would 5%, maybe more, depending on how we're able to work that out, but at least 5% off that money every single year. The same thing would be true of the people of the private equity firms that are coming in to purchase to buy those houses that I was talking about earlier. Now, and that money would go into the endowment fund. Now, this is a twofold purpose, right? We're going to help fund that endowment fund that's going to create more and more money for years to come, and people that move into the state are now invested in the state, and they've paid their way, essentially, as opposed to those that have lived here our whole lives. We pay taxes every single year for our entire life. Now, so that it takes care of that, but then it also does a major thing for the issue with housing. And I'm sure anyone can guess what that is. If you were highly taxing those particular funds that are coming in, I think that's on a sliding scale, right? The more and more they purchase, the higher and higher it goes. And the same thing for the out-of-staters. Okay? When that happens, you are going to limit the amount of buying that takes place, and that's going to bring the market down. And it's going to, if there's increases taking place in the state itself, it's going to be a more gradual increase. The sad part is that because it has taken so long for the government to take any action, it's going to put a lot of people upside, they're going to be upside down in their homes. But through the money that we receive from these particular taxes from the out-of-staters and from private equity firms, we will be able to hopefully provide some level of relief later on to those that are in a tighter spot with their home. Because to shrug your shoulders and say there's nothing the government can do to fix the housing market when they caused it, all due respect, I don't think it's the best move. It's not the way to go about it. I agree with a lot of the other things that he's talking about, but we really have to move forward, and we have to tackle this in order to ensure that the people aren't stuck in a terrible situation. And by the way, I'm one of those people. Okay, I'm not just talking from the sidelines. I'm in the process of building my house, and because of the way things have gone, I've had to go out and do a lot of the work myself. And happy to do it, happy to make that happen, obviously for the sake and future of my family. But we can't continue to believe that one thing isn't connected to the other, and that we can't do anything about it, particularly since we caused it and permitted it. And that's the role of the government should entirely be limited, but when they cause a problem, they should move forward to make some adjustments to change that. And that includes deregulation, that includes removing taxes, that includes a whole myriad of things. And again, please go to govmet.org, download it, click on the streaming link, do whatever you need to do in order to understand everything that I am working towards, because I really do believe that if we wield the 10th Amendment, the powers of the state, we will really be able to make a huge difference in the country, and we can be that beacon of light that's going to help others realize, hey, I can't continue to lean on the federal government anymore. I have to make my own efforts in my state to make the change. And I'm grateful that I'm able to do this. I want to leave you with I like to do little spiritual thoughts. Whether or not you're spiritual doesn't really matter. But there's, if you're familiar with the Book of Mormon, it's a great book. Go read it. But it says, it's talking about Nephites and Lamanites, and it's talking about a very specific thing where the Lamanites, these individuals, are coming in and they're trying to take over the Nephites. The Nephites are just trying to live their lives. They're just trying to be good people, and the Lamanites want to stop them because they believe they should be in power. Does that sound similar to today? Anyway, it says, nevertheless, the Nephites were inspired by a better cause, so they're about to go to war. For they were not fighting for monarchy nor power, but they were fighting for their homes and their liberties, their wives and their children, and their all. Yea, for their rights of worship and their church. And they were doing that which they felt was the duty of which they owed to their God. For the Lord had said unto them and also unto their fathers, that inasmuch as they are guilty of the first offense, neither the second, ye shall not suffer yourselves to be slain by the hands of your enemy. And again the Lord said that ye shall defend your families even unto bloodshed. And I hope it doesn't come to that in our state, but it may very well come to that, unfortunately. We need to defend our families. We need to defend our ability to worship. We need to defend our wives, our children. We have to do these things, but we can do it together if we can get the right people in office, and we can stop this continuous and honestly silly pursuit of propping up parties and propping up particular individuals. We need to fight for the right and not for the politically expedient, not for our team, not for whatever. And I think if we're willing to do that, we will see success. And I thank you. Please go to mattgov.org, check out my book /proposal, and I'll see you next time.